I'm in the process of tearing up the chicken tractor, or tearing it down rather. And I saw a few things that made me think a little bit, and I thought maybe I'd point out some issues and some things to pay attention to when you're doing construction on items that are always going to be outside, especially if they're made of wood. So for starters, this thing here is a platform that I built that used to butt up against this stump, and it was kind of just something for my kid to play on when he was little. And the outside of it is all painted and treated. And we live in eastern Oklahoma, and humidity is a thing here. And you can see all of the moisture damage in this wood, because I didn't think that I needed to treat the bottom side of any of this. Now the top side of it has actually held up really well with the stuff that's on it, but first thing, I guess the point behind this is, even something that you've got that the top side of it's treated, depending on your local area, like I said, we have a lot of humidity here. So water gets in there, moisture gets in there, and you've got to treat it. You've got to take care of it at some level. If I don't do anything about this, eventually that's going to spread into the 2x6s, and the whole thing's going to rot. So really, I got to pull the plywood and then treat everything and then put new plywood on it. But point is, don't neglect the underside. All right, so out here where the chicken tractor is, where my son has apparently started turning it into a fort, there's a few things. For the most part, you can see that yes, it was painted. The areas that were not painted were covered by roofing, with some small exceptions. So with that, I noticed as I was taking it apart, for one, I failed to paint this one section of this board. This was painted, and then this was covered with backboard. So all of this stuff was covered, and so you can see this still has the bright yellow, like new lumber look, so to speak. This is a little bit weathered, and then that is what naturally happens to wood as it sits in the weather. And that's kind of the same as the sheathing, where it wasn't painted. That's the natural color of it. I mean, you can even see the gradient here. It eventually goes gray and gets nasty. So you have to cover it, you have to paint it, you have to do something. Now, that being said, there's a lot of stuff out here that was painted, and we still ran into water issues, because if it's not completely sealed and completely watertight, you're still going to have issues. So along here, this was all caulked in and it was sealed, so we didn't have any water getting into that area. There's a little bit maybe down here that you can see, but if we come around the side, some of the areas where even here we did have caulking, but maybe here we didn't have great sealing, and you can see we got a little bit of discoloration there. Okay, so this actually had enough water separation or water damage in here to weaken this and cause it to break. Now this isn't terribly bad, but you can see the discoloration where the screw was, which means that and then it leaked in here. So that's where the water was getting in. And then of course the back side of this wasn't painted. If you're going to paint it, you got to paint everything, and then you have to maintain it. So what I mean by that is, like this, the external parts were painted, but I didn't keep up on it. And right here, we had unpainted or lightly painted wood in an area where water is going to get down inside there and get stuck. And then we also have screws penetrating all these pieces of wood. So anytime you have a screw going through the wood or a nail going through the wood, any kind of penetration, you've got to paint over the top of it, or it has to be covered or something, because if you don't, you're going to get water in there and it's going to rot. Here's an example of that. One thing that happens aside from the rot is the wood is going to shrink. And so you can see here where this is screwed in with 2.5-inch exterior screws. The wood has shrunk and this is loose. This piece obviously wasn't painted, so anything that gets down in here is going to cause it to rot and crack and basically fall apart. So anything that gets down in here, because this wasn't painted, it's going to get into the end grain and it's going to soak up all that moisture and just wick it into the wood. Here's an example again where most of this board was painted, but it was painted after it was assembled. So if I don't seal these edges where the other board sits on here, moisture is going to get in here. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but this is actually kind of wallowed out a little bit. You can see we've got fungus growing on the edge. We've got cracks in the end grain. So the end grain is the most susceptible to moisture damage. I mean, obviously you don't want to have water just sitting on top of it. You have to do something about that. But this is more susceptible than face grain. If you look at, I don't know if I have a piece, you look at an unpainted piece of board and you can see the rings in there, that's because that was the direction that the tree was vertically. So the tubes that carried moisture and nutrients through the tree when it was alive, they still carry moisture now that the tree's dead. So over here we can see a lot more rot. This is completely ruined. So the end grain was painted, but we had screws going into the end grain. Then we had another board here coming in this way that was screwed in. You can see that moisture obviously got in from there. This whole thing's just rotten. So what do? How are you going to stop that from happening? This is, I think, 3 years old at this point. It's been rebuilt a bunch of times, but it's not really that old. And it was painted with exterior latex paint. Well, for one, all of these penetrations, all these nail holes and staple marks where we had the wire that was stapled onto this, every penetration you have in opens it up. And even though there's a staple in there, over time it's going to loosen up, it's going to expand, it's going to contract, and you're going to get water in there. And it's going to mold, it's going to rot, it's going to break. So if I would have put paint down again on top of the staples and the nails, I probably could have slowed that down. But you got to do something. So then you've got an area like this where you have a seam. Water is going to get in here, and because I didn't paint this vertical support before I installed it. You can see right there on the edge, it's not painted on the inside. So even though it's just a small edge, that whole edge is open. So anytime water runs in here, it's going to sit, it's going to run down in between these boards, and it's going to soak in right here. Focus. It's going to soak into this, and you can see, if you look down here, we've got fungus. We've got a big old crack going right through the middle of this. For the most part, I try to prevent cracks by pre-drilling all of the screw holes where they don't screw in, so they go through one board and they screw into another board. I generally pre-drill the boards that they go through to help prevent that. But in this case, if I would have taken some caulking or some paint and forced it in there, then I probably could have prevented this from happening. But again, all this rot in only a couple of years. Same thing down here. This is worn away from the chickens standing on it, scratching it, pecking at it, doing whatever. If I would have left this like this without repainting it, it's going to rain. Rain's going to sit right there. It's going to soak in. Now, it's not quite as bad as getting into the end grain, but you're going to end up with the same failure. So, what do you do? Even with something like a chicken tractor that's expected to live out in the field, all you can do is cover, protect, treat, however you want to look at it. So in the case of the roof was covered. You can tell by looking at the condition of the wood. And wow, it's pretty bad. So here, this was one of the sideboards that went on the back right here. And it was, actually no, this was one of the front boards. So same area, but it covered the front side up here. And it sat like this. Now I painted this, and so it still looks pretty good. And it was caulked on the bottom. You can see all this residue here. Well, if it was caulked and it was painted, why do we still have mold starting in the wood? Well, I didn't paint the bottom side of it. This little edge, which is again end grain. So anywhere along this whole edge, if there was a tiny spot in this caulking where water could get in there, it's going to get into the end, it's going to sit there and soak up, and it's going to go right into the wood, and that's where your rot's going to start. So even this, if I would have painted the entire thing, or if I would have made sure that I had a lot of caulking and everything was sealed up, then I could have prevented that. But it has to be covered, it has to be painted, it has to be protected with something, either physical covering or something. But anywhere that you have penetrations through the wood, anywhere that it's exposed, even if you live in, Arizona, and you don't have to really worry about rain, you're going to have UV bleaching, and eventually the sun's going to break it down. So paint helps there as well. So that's really all I got. Again, this wood is not that old, and if I would have painted this before I put it together, I could have saved a lot of this rot from happening. There's probably something to be said a little bit for maintenance as well. If you notice the boards becoming loose, tighten them up, because anywhere you have a gap where water can get inside there between these boards, it's going to sit there and it's going to just rot more. So like here on this edge, if I had these screwed together and this is painted, it'll help. If it's caulked so that nothing can get in there, and maybe you caulk the edges, leave the bottom open so that anything can run out, then that's going to be the best you can do. If you caulk it and then paint over the top of it, that's going to probably be even better. But just paint alone, if you don't paint the entire thing, isn't going to do it. Anyway, things to consider. Anytime that you've got a penetration into wood, cover it, paint it, plug it, do something. Make sure that everything's painted. Make sure that you're maintaining your paint. A couple years goes by, throw some more paint on it. So, I mean, I know that this sounds really simple, like, hey, paint your stuff, but I thought that I had painted this well enough that I wasn't going to have to deal with rot. So, don't do what I did.